sound.
Okay. And then should start video. Or no, it's already on here. Oh, perfect.
Should be the video and sound here. Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you. Came just straight from the airport. My flight was delayed. They needed to fill up with gas or something like that. So important. We were about 4 gallons short. But I'm really excited that I made it. I'm really excited to join you all today. So my name is St. Clair Dietrich Jules. Oh, thank you so much. I'm an author, filmmaker, activist, photojournalist from Washington, D.C. And my work focuses on Black liberation, women's rights, immigrant justice, and pretty much anything social justice related. Okay, perfect. I'm a big advocate for, and so a lot of my work focuses around marginalized communities and using storytelling as a way to sort of try to create a more just world for marginalized communities. Can everybody hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I was gonna say, feel free to skip forward. I guess there's space in here if anyone wants to. So before I get started talking about this particular project, Black Hair, there's just a couple of things that I want everybody to sort of keep in mind. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently too. And so the first thing I want you all to think about is how many times you've been told, in particular in your academic careers, how many times you've been told to avoid using the first person in your writing, right? So think about how many times you've been discouraged from using the word I, because it weakens your writing, because it makes your writing less objective, more subjective, right? Because it makes your writing less powerful. So just think about how many times you've been discouraged from using your first person narrative, your first person voice in academic settings. And then the second thing I want you all to think about is what happens when people get to share their stories and be heard. And in particular, what happens when people from marginalized communities have a platform to share and be listened to, right? Because I don't think any of us are voiceless, right? We all have voices, but it's just that we're not often given a platform and we're not listened to, right? And so with that being said, I'm gonna share a story that's very personal to me. And so this is my little sister, Chloe. She's a lot younger than me. When she was 4 years old, she came home from school one day crying because she goes to this majority white school in southern France, and her little white classmates had started bullying her about her afro. So they told her that her hair was ugly. They told her that her hair looked like little pieces of shrimp. They just made her feel really, really bad about her hair. And so it was crazy to me that at this young age of just 4 years old, her classmates already knew that her Black hair was something they could use to weaponize against her, right? And make her feel bad about herself. And so my sister came home from school crying. She didn't want to go back to school anymore. She told my dad and my stepmom that she was too embarrassed of her hair. She didn't want to be seen with this kind of hair. And she just wanted to stay home. And that was really heartbreaking for me, first of all, because you don't want to see anybody who you love cry, right? But also because it made me think about my own hair journey. And so this was, me when I was little. And I also went through a long phase of not liking my hair. And so even though I have a looser curl pattern than my sister Chloe, I also went to a majority white elementary school for 6 years. And so during that time period, I became very, very self-conscious of my hair and really everything related to my Blackness, my skin color, my facial features, everything about me I thought was sort of wrong, right? And in particular, my hair, because all of my little white classmates, all of the little white girls had this long, beautiful straight hair, and I wanted hair just like theirs. And so I felt very different. And even though I wasn't bullied in the same way that my sister was bullied, I still held a lot of self-hatred because of my hair. And so when I think about this burden that I had to carry, that my sister was starting to carry, I think that's a burden that so many of us have to carry of feeling different, right? And so when I think about Black kids, for example, we're so often born into a world that tells us that our natural hair is not enough, right? That our bodies that we're born into aren't enough. And there's a metaphor that people sometimes use that I like to sort of think about when I think about this. It has to do with a glass of water. I'll say a bottle of water. And so basically, if you think about holding a bottle of water, right? You have to hold a bottle of water for like a minute. It's not a big deal, right? You can probably do it. If you have to hold a glass or a bottle of water for like an hour, your arm is going to start to get a little tired. Then if you have to hold a bottle of water for a whole day, your arm is going to get pretty exhausted, right? Just holding this bottle of water. And then if you have to hold this bottle of water year after year after year, it's going to become almost unbearable, right? And your arm is going to be really exhausted, even though it's just this little bottle of water, right? But the weight over time really gets to you. And so this is what I think about when I think about the burden that so many Black kids have to bear starting at such a young age of believing that our hair and our bodies are not enough. And so I didn't want my sister Chloe to have to carry this burden the way that I did and the way that so many of my other Black friends have had to do. And so I decided that I wanted to combat this by giving her representation because I'm sure that all of us in some ways can relate to feeling different, right? And for whatever reason in different circumstances. And so for my sister Chloe, I know that in terms of race, she doesn't see other people who look like her at her school, right? She doesn't see people her race at her school. She doesn't see people who look like her in her neighborhood, majority white neighborhood. She doesn't see people who look like her in mainstream media, right? If we think about the little Disney movies, most of them are these little white princesses with long straight hair. And then the one, Disney princess, Tiana from Princess and the Frog, she has straight hair and then she's a frog like half the movie, right? So we really don't see that representation starting it from such a young age. And then even within our own family, my sister Chloe, it's four of us siblings, and Chloe has the tightest curl pattern, right? And so even within our family, she doesn't necessarily get the exact representation, the full representation that she deserves. And so I wanted to show her that even though she may not see it around her, right, in close proximity, there actually is this huge community of Black women and girls out there embracing and loving their natural hair, right? And I wanted her to understand and see that it's possible to love this kind of hair texture. And so what I did was I went around and photographed what ended up being 101 Black women and girls about their natural hair journey. And so I know everybody has a different hair story, right? Everybody in the Black community. For this project, I was specifically focusing on Black women because I'm a Black woman and my sister is growing into a Black woman, right? But also just acknowledging that, of course, everybody in our community has really, I think, nuanced and complex and beautiful relationships with our hair. And so anyways, for this book, I interviewed 101 Black women about their natural hair journeys. And so I asked these women how they went natural, when they went natural, why they went natural, how they learned to love themselves and embrace their natural hair, even in spite of a lot of the criticisms that they received, discrimination that they received, right? Because a lot of the women shared that they got pushback from coworkers, from classmates, from friends, even sometimes from family members when they decided to go natural. So there was one woman, for example, who said that her dad actually stopped talking to her for a few months when she went natural. And so I asked all of these women, how did you manage to continue loving yourself and to choose your most authentic self and sort of tune out all of the negative voices, right? How did you manage to keep that self-love inside of you? And so this is the result. It's my beautiful Black hair, 101 natural hair stories from the Sisterhood, where I recorded all of these interviews and transcribed them and then photographed all of these women. And hopefully, as you can see, just from these few photos right here, let me make sure I'm in the frame. I really did try to include a wide range of hairstyles, hair textures, hair lengths, hair colors, because I wanted to show Chloe and really everybody that there's so much versatility in our natural hair and that all hair textures, styles, lengths, that it's all equally beautiful and it's all equally professional and worthy of love, right? And so I tried to capture that diversity even within our own community as well. And so I'm going to read this letter that I wrote for my sister Chloe at the beginning of the book, thinking about where she is now, where I was when I was her age, and what I would have wanted someone to tell me when I was that age. So I'm going to share my letter to Chloe, and then I'm going to share some of the words from the women who I interviewed as well. And so this was my letter for Chloe at the beginning of the book. Dear Chloe, my beautiful, powerful little sister. When I was 18, a couple months before I started college, you burst into this world. A bundle of energy, ready to take up space and radiate love. You are so full of life, Chloe, so it seems only fitting that your hair is equally alive. Your afro reaches for the sun, and the sun graces its tips. When you run on the beach, tracing the outlines of recent waves, your hair becomes alive. It bounces and dances and sings. Your hair hugs your face, holds it tight, whispers in your ear to remind you that you are the descendant of Africans, of Africa. You and I have different white mothers, but we are connected by our Black father, by our Black ancestors, brought from Africa in chains to the Caribbean. The power, the strength, the eventual liberation of our ancestors live within us. I am grateful for our Blackness, because our Blackness makes us powerful, makes us sisters. When Dad called to tell me you were ashamed of your afro, I became furious at the world for making you feel this way. Some people say that change must be gradual, that Black girls with natural hair must be patient as the media slowly but surely begins giving us a hint of representation here and there. But I don't believe in gradual change. So I took matters into my own hands, because you matter, and you deserve to know today that your natural crown is beautiful. So I want to lead by example. I want to teach you how to love yourself by loving myself, by introducing you to other Black women who love themselves. As Black women, we have to stop waiting for the world to love us, and we have to start loving ourselves unconditionally. Chloe, I want you to know that I love you unconditionally, but more importantly, I want you to love yourself unconditionally. Your sister, St. Clair. So it's the letter that I wrote for my sister at the beginning of the book. And now, thank you. And now I'm going to share a few of the words from some of the women who I interviewed. And so as I was creating this project, I thought about maybe turning it into a documentary. And that didn't end up happening, but I ended up with a ton of footage from a lot of my interviews. So I'm going to share some of those videos. And this first video is some of the women talking about the natural hair movement and going natural, right? And so in case anybody is unfamiliar with sort of the concept of going natural and the big chop, right? Basically in the Black community, relaxers are pretty common. And so what a relaxer basically chemically straightens your hair, right? So once you put in the relaxer, there's no way to get rid of it except by literally cutting that hair out, right? And so going natural can be a really big deal for a lot of people in the Black community, because it's a big decision, right, to chop off all of your hair, right? Because you can't just take a shower and wash the relaxer out. And so that's just a little bit of background for when some of the women talk about going natural, right, or doing the big chop. And so I'm going to share, I got confused between laptops. I'm going to share this first video of some of the women talking about that. Is there much turned up? Sorry. There's subtitles. right, there's also subtitles, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
In case you can't hear it fully, okay.
Sorry, one more.
Are you looking to have audio
The
on
optimize,
the
yeah.
Zoom? It's actually the share screen button. Stop sharing. And then, yeah. There you go. I should say. Okay. We have to stop sharing.
Do you think we can already hear? Or no?
We should have been able to. We don't have to share screen. If you hit it now, if you hit share screen, that will carry it.
Ew. Okay. So you should be good now.
Okay. Should I mute this? This laptop over here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it muted? Yes, it's already muted.
We're just trying to volume down. Oh, okay.
These are just technical difficulties. Okay. I can't actually find the thing. You know where I don't know where your actual presentation went.
Oh, it's.
Sorry, y'all.
Oh, here it is, here it is.
Okay, great.
Okay, and then can we mute this laptop? Okay. All right, you should be good. I'm just gonna start it over. Thanks, guys. All right, here we go. Okay.
National is coming back. And I love it. That's not getting into it. Huh? It's part of the now. But it's one of the bigger my hair gets, the more beautiful I think it is.
All right, so that's the first video. And then the second sort of compilation video that I'm gonna share with you all. Was it okay with the subtitles?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So the second video that I'm gonna share is some of the women again talking this time directly to my little sister Chloe, right? And so one of the things I asked these women was to think back to when they were Chloe's age, when they were 4 years old, and what are some of the things, sort of like I did with my letter, what are some of the things they would have wanted to hear at that age, right? And so I asked them to share it with Chloe, and really by extension, I think for anybody, again, who has ever felt sort of uncomfortable in their own bodies, right? Because I think the overarching message is always self-love. And so I'm going to share the second video.
Very awesome. Great. Get into it.
Oh,
Mom?
sorry, I'm not used to Max actually. Here we go.
Hi, Chloe, the little Miss Chloe, you have amazing hair. It's just so naturally beautiful. Your hair is absolutely gorgeous. You're beautiful, you're seen. I mean, Chloe, I was you once. It was hard to believe myself to be worthy when the people around me, convinced me otherwise. Growing up, I wish I had a sister or somebody who told me that I'm beautiful the way that I am. You know what else I would say? You know, we're all different, and that's okay. Don't be afraid to be you. Your hair is definitely a part of you, so let it be a part of your skin. Your hair will love you, and you'll probably it, you'll learn, well, stay natural. You have to keep your head high. You have to surround yourself with people that love you to show you how to love yourself. That should be
All right, so that's the second video that I'll share for now. Thank you. And one of the things that I realized as I was creating this book, right, was this sense of community that we have amongst ourselves, because I think oftentimes in the Black community and marginalized communities in general, I think it's easy to feel lonely, right? Especially if there aren't many people around us who look like us. And so I think it's easy to feel lonely, right? Like you go through a lot by your own, you're navigating a lot of things on your own, but really creating this book showed me that we really do have a very strong community. And so a lot of the women who I reached out to be part of this project, some of them were my friends and I knew them ahead of time, but some of the women I didn't know before this project. And I was really overwhelmed in sort of the best possible way by how many women didn't know me, didn't know my sister, but agreed to be part of this project because they had been in Chloe's shoes before and they understood what it was like and they didn't want anybody else to go through that. And I think that that really speaks to our shared humanity and our shared sisterhood, right? And the fact that we are always sort of leaning into community, right? We are always looking for ways to enter into community, right? And so I think that this was a really great reminder for me that there's community all around us if we seek it out, right? And if we create it for ourselves, because even if sometimes it's like, we're all we have, I think that's also important to remember that we're all that we need, right? Everything we need, we have within ourselves, within our communities. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I learned from creating this book. And one of those things is vulnerability. So sort of has to do with hair still. Here we go. All right. So one of the things is vulnerability. And so I think oftentimes we think of vulnerability as a weakness, but throughout the process of creating this book, I realized that vulnerability, I think now is actually a really huge strength, right? To be brave enough, to be courageous enough to open yourself up and to share these pieces of yourselves, right? I think that that's a very brave thing to do. And so again, I was really overwhelmed in a great way by how many women opened themselves up and allowed themselves to be vulnerable with me, but also with the world through this book, right? And so I'm going to share a couple examples of that vulnerability. And so the first example is this video of a woman who, again, I had just met a couple days before I interviewed her, and she really, I think, opened up, and I was grateful for that. So I'll share her video here.
the way that Black women is kind of Canadian mainstream media just fortunately, it's possible that, the ball and teams. Who's white and who's black and who's this and who's that.
So that's the first sort of example of vulnerability that I want to share. And then the second example, it's not a video, it's just a picture. Let's see. Here we go. So these are three young women who were about to graduate from a really big public high school in New York City called, I believe it's called Bronx Science. And so this high school has only a 2% Black student population. And so these three girls were part of that very small 2%, right? The vast majority of the other students were white and Asian. And so over the past 4 years, right, because they were just about to graduate from high school. So over the past 4 years, as you can imagine, they've grown really close and found community within each other. But there were things that when we did our interview, which is really just sort of an informal conversation that I record, they opened up about things that I could tell they hadn't shared even with each other before. And so I asked them first to share their hair stories. And so they shared their hair stories and their struggles around their hair. And then I said, okay, now you can share anything about Blackness or womanhood or identity or marginalization, anything you want to talk about. And so one of the women started sharing that she, at some point in high school, had become self-conscious because of her weight. And so she, at some point, had developed an eating disorder because she was self-conscious of that, right? She didn't feel like her body fit into the beauty standards of her high school. And then after she shared that, which she hadn't shared with the others before, one of the other young women shared that she had gone through a similar experience, also feeling really uncomfortable in her body with her weight. And then after these two girls shared, the third girl shared that she didn't have the same issue around weight, but she was very self-conscious of her darker skin tone, right? Because even within the Black community, right, we know that there's colorism ingrained in us. And so she said that she had been really self-conscious about her darker skin tone. And so there was a point during her high school career, and she had actually started going to the beauty supply store and buying skin bleaching cream. She had bleached certain parts of her body, right? Ankles, knuckles, knees, elbows, that kind of thing. And she did that for a while until her dad noticed and addressed it. And that's when she was really able to start her self-love journey in terms of loving her skin tone, right? In addition to loving her hair. But I thought that even though it was really heartbreaking to hear these stories, right? Because no one should ever be going through this, right? And feeling uncomfortable in our bodies, which are all so beautiful. I think it was also really heartwarming to see how they were finally able to open up to each other, because we had all sort of collectively created this space where everyone knew that it was okay to be vulnerable without any sort of judgment, right? And we could just share our stories. And there wouldn't be any sort of negative reaction to the stories, right? They would all just be met with love. And so going back to this idea of storytelling, right? I think that it is important for us to continue creating these spaces for ourselves and for each other to be vulnerable in that way, to feel comfortable sharing these pieces of ourselves with each other. And when I sort of go back to this metaphor, the bottled water, I think that it's obviously heavier if we have to carry it by ourselves. But I think that when we share our stories and we release that shame, right, that we've been holding on to alone, I think that the burden that we carry becomes a lot lighter, right? We can share it and we don't have to hold this all on our own. And so I was really grateful, right, for that and for this idea of vulnerability and for so many people opening up. And then I'm going to come back to this idea in particular of hair, right? And so when I was creating this book, I really just thought I was making this for my sister. I thought that I was already at an okay place with my hair, right? From the time I finished elementary school to the time when I finished college, I had really grown to accept my hair texture. But there were things that I learned and started thinking about as I was working on this book that really helped me personally find and created sort of an even deeper relationship with my hair. And so one of the things that some women talked about was this idea that, especially within the Black community, our hair can tie us to our ancestry. And I thought this was really beautiful because I think for a lot of us in the Black community who are African-American or Afro-Caribbean, like my family, or just in general, Black people in the diaspora who don't necessarily have the ability to trace their roots directly back to Africa, I think it can be easy to feel disconnected from that past, right? Because it's been so long, because when our ancestors were enslaved and brought over to this side of the world, everything was stripped from them, right? Including spirituality, culture, traditions, hair traditions. Sometimes hair itself was stripped from our ancestors, right? There were slave owners who would literally have their slaves' heads completely shaved, right? And as we know, hair was important to a lot of our ancestors, right? And so there was this sort of complete stripping of identity. And so, of course, it makes sense that a lot of us feel disconnected from our past, right? Including myself. But some of the women who I interviewed pointed out that if we choose to see it this way, our hair really can be a connection to our ancestry and to our heritage, right? Because no matter how many centuries it's been of colonization and slavery and colonialism and just overall white supremacy, right? No amount of that can take away this texture of hair that we have, right? And our ancestors may not have been able to pass down physical family heirlooms, but they were able to give us this gift of textured hair, right? And so that's really something to honor, I think. And this was really beautiful for me to hear. Oh, something on my laptop. This was really beautiful for me to hear, right? In order to not only see my hair as something that's aesthetically beautiful, but also something that's rooted in this powerful history, right? And so this woman, she's one of the women who talked about this idea of hair and ancestry. And so I'm going to read her piece to you all. And this is a letter that she also wrote to my sister, Chloe. Pretty short. She wrote, "Dear Chloe, you stand on the shoulders of great women. We are the first. All life came out of Africa, and your hair is a symbol and representation of a greatness that is yours to tap into. When you wear your hair in its natural state, you're tapping into greatness. And those of us whose ancestors survived the Middle Passage, we're survivors. We have some powerful genes, and that ain't nothing to play with. Your sister, Elise." So I thought this was a really beautiful reminder, right, of our resilience, and also a reminder that we, as Black people, as people of color in general, right, we exist outside of whiteness as well, right? Because there are all these things that have been done to us and done to our people, but we also exist outside of this history of slavery, right? We have our own identity independent of all of that. So I think that was a great reminder for me. And then there was another woman who also talked about this idea of hair and ancestry. And this was interesting to me because she's African American. Obviously I always knew she was Black, but growing up had really no idea where in Africa her ancestors were from, right? Several hundred years ago. And so she said she used to get weaves and relaxers at the same time. And it wasn't until she did her ancestry DNA test and was able to pinpoint the specific regions in Africa where her ancestors were from, that she realized she only ever wanted to wear her hair natural moving forward as a way to honor her ancestors, because now that she was able to pinpoint where in this huge continent her people came from, she felt more connected to that past. And so I thought that was really beautiful. And I'm going to share a short video from her as well.
Now I'm in the phase of the Afro America, or American Philadelphia, with a connecting on to this. It's to be an opportunity for change and damage it just to be just the fact that people still view it as a that's my life. But it's not. No one will care about that.
And I love that she said that our hair defies gravity, right? And I think that really speaks to the aesthetic beauty of our hair, also outside of politics, outside of social constructs, right? All of that, just the fact that it is aesthetically beautiful. And so there's another woman who I interviewed who talked about her hair being strong and sturdy. And I thought this was really interesting, right? This idea of the strength of our hair being reflected in the strength of us, both as individuals and as a community. And so I'm going to share her video with you all as well.
capture your hard habits along, straight along the time. And like make sure that. It's pretty well made, even though a lot of people say, because it's so big, like, it's very like, sturdy.
And then sort of the last thing that I want to talk about from this book in particular, in terms of themes, is this idea of hair as identity, right? So think about how our strength, right, is reflected in our hair. There were a lot of women who actually talked about how their hair is related to their identity. And obviously, there were some women who I interviewed who said that their hair isn't part of their identity, that's just genetics. And I think it's important that everybody has their own truth when it comes to their hair. But there were a lot of women who said that their hair is a big part of how they see themselves. And so the first example is this woman on the cover of the book. And so you've seen her at the end of every video. So her name is Francesca, and she is half African-American, half Latina. And she said that when she was growing up, her mom had started relaxing her hair from a really young age, from the time she was 3 or 4 years old, right? And so she never knew what her natural hair texture looked like. And every time she looked in the mirror, starting from when she was 3 or 4 years old, she just saw this straight hair, right? And so she said that because of that, she was really able to distance herself from her Blackness. And she leaned into her Latina identity, but also felt a lot of shame around the Black pieces of her, and really was able to deny that in large part because of her hair, right? Because she didn't have to see her textured hair. And she said it wasn't until she became an adult and gained autonomy over her own hair and did the big chop and went natural and saw that this is what her hair texture is, right? That she has an afro. And she said that's when she could no longer deny her Blackness. And so she's really stepped into that now because of her hair. And so because of her hair, she said that that's really changed how she sees herself. It's changed her beliefs. It's changed her values, how she sees the world. And so I think that that's really sort of beautiful too, right? How our hair can teach us things about ourselves if we allow it to. And then there's just 2 other videos that I want to share, having to do with this idea of hair and identity. Are you guys okay with the subtitles still? Just check out maybe that. Okay. All right. Thank you. So yeah, 2 videos. Yeah. This? All right. Perfect. So I'll share the first video.
Before, like, I was always trying to paint my hair, and just having my hair. I don't know. Here's that. And now I'm here. You know, and I love it. And it's just like now people know my hair. The bigger my hair gets, the more beautiful I make it is. It's like a part of who I am. My hair speaks for itself. It's about who I am, about my values, about how I decide to portray myself to the world, and that's like I like.
All right. And then the last video that I'll share with you all also has to do with hair and identity.
It's like I wake up in the morning and my hair has something to do. Get hair, color to play with it, figure out what it's like, figure out what it's like. Just literally look in the mirror and say, how do you look like everyone else? Your clothes are beautiful. Your hair is definitely a part of you, so let it be a part of you.
Right. And as I'm talking, so much about natural hair and self-love, I also just want to talk a bit about why some Black women might not go natural, right? And so my goal with this book isn't to say every Black woman has to be natural, right? My sister has to be natural, but my goal really is to create a world, or help create a world, where natural hair is seen as just as beautiful and just as professional and just as worthy of love as straight hair, right? I don't think any Black person, anybody, should feel like they have to change their hair texture to fit in, right? And so I think that's really important. And so some of the women who I interviewed shared examples of how difficult that can be as Black women, right? And trying to negotiate all of these different parts of society while also trying to love ourselves and trying to love our natural hair. And so one of the women, for example, shared that when she went natural, her curl pattern is fairly loose, right? And so her mom's reaction was fairly positive to her going natural. But when her sister went natural, her sister has a much tighter curl pattern. And so her mom's reaction to her sister going natural was much more negative, right? Because there's texturism even ingrained in us, right? In our own community, seeing tighter curl patterns as less beautiful. And so when her sister went natural, her mom was upset about it. And so she said that now every time she goes home, she really has to be there to stick up for her sister and defend her sister and remind the mom that all natural hair textures are beautiful, right? And every Black person has that right to wear their hair in its natural state without facing criticism, and especially criticism from family members, right? From these people who are supposed to love us the most. And then there was another woman who I interviewed, who is a good friend of mine actually, and she has a weave and a relaxer, but she really wanted to go natural. She was really excited about it. Obviously, people go natural for all different reasons. For her, she wanted to have better scalp health, and so she was really excited to start sort of this natural hair journey, this healthy hair journey. And she was going to do the big chop, and I was going to photograph her at the hair salon doing the big chop for the book and everything. And we were both really excited, but the day before her big chop appointment, she decided against it because she has a pretty good government paying job right now. And she was worried, especially as a darker skinned Black woman, that if she went natural, that would lower her chances of future raises and promotions, right, at her job. And so again, there's just so much that we have to negotiate when it comes to our hair and balancing how we want to wear our hair versus how it's going to be perceived in society, right? And so again, with this book, I really want to highlight or help highlight that all Black hair styles, textures, lengths should be seen as beautiful, right? And we should be allowed to wear our hair however we want without any kind of fear of repercussions from anybody. And so I say all that again, just to say that I think it's important that we in our community have autonomy over our own hair, right? And how we wear our hair. And so I think going back to this idea of ancestry, right? I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about the history of Black hair, politics of Black hair. So if we go back to pre-colonization, many of our ancestors, obviously not everybody in Africa, but many of the communities, many of the tribes had hairstylists in their communities who were held in really high regard, right? Because hairstylists were seen as very skilled community members, right? And so some hairstyles could take days to do. It was really a talent. And depending on the hairstyle that people in certain tribes wore, that could be a marker for certain aspects of their identity. So it could tell people their gender, it could tell people their age, their marital status, whether or not they were grieving or in mourning, right? There were all these things that could be sort of denoted from our hair. And again, a lot of that was stripped from our ancestors when they were brought over here. And then ever since, there's been this constant policing of Black hair, both sort of by law and then also just socially, as we see all the time all around us, right? I'm sure we all have stories of us or someone we know or someone we've seen in the media, right? Stories that we've heard about. And so starting way back, one of the earlier examples that I found of this sort of legal hair discrimination were the Tignon laws in Louisiana. And so the Tignon laws were back in the 1700s, and they stated basically that any woman of color, any Black woman, whether she was enslaved or free, was not allowed to show her hair in public. So by law, Black women, even if they were technically free from slavery, they still had to cover their hair in public, right? So there's just this constant policing of Black women's hair. And I think it's easy to say, okay, well, that was in the past, right? That was hundreds of years ago. But even still, there is this sort of legalized discrimination against many Black hairstyles. And it wasn't until 1976 that the Afro became protected under law. Obviously, we know that there's still examples of people being discriminated against for Afros, but it took until 1976 for the Afro to become protected under the Civil Rights Act. And it took a Black woman going to court because this Black woman had an Afro and she was told by her job that she couldn't do her job with her afro. She had to do something else with her hair. And so she took the case to court and ended up winning. And that's when it became technically illegal to deny someone employment or educational opportunities or government opportunities because of their afro, right? But there's still today many other Afrocentric, traditionally Black hairstyles that aren't protected in the same way, right? So it's still legal to discriminate against many Black hairstyles. And so in 2013, which is only a decade ago, there was a similar court case of a Black woman with dreadlocks. And she was told by her employer that she had to get rid of her dreadlocks in order to work for them. And she took the case to court, right? Argued that she can do her job very well with her dreadlocks. And she ends up losing the case, right? And so the verdict was that it was legal to discriminate against her and deny her employment because of her dreadlocks. And so still today, that's something that we're fighting in most of the country. And more recently, starting in 2019, there's been this act that's been passed in several states, in 20 states now, Crown Act. Are you guys familiar with the Crown Act? Okay, yeah. So the Crown Act stands for creating a respectful and open world for our natural hair. And the goal of the Crown Act is really to ban race-based hair discrimination. So in particular for the Black community, this is really important, right? In terms of dreadlocks, braids, bantu knots, all of these hairstyles. And so even though the Crown Act should be a given, right, you would think that it would easily pass. It actually failed on a national level this past year, right? So didn't get passed. And so now it's back to going state by state. And so it's been passed in 20 states so far, but that leaves still 30 states, right? So most of the country where it is legal to discriminate based on certain Afrocentric hairstyles. But so as I'm talking about the Crown Act, I sort of want to go back and end on this idea of storytelling before opening up the space a bit. So one of the things that the folks from the Crown Act have been doing is they're advocating to pass the Crown Act across the country in all these different states, and they've been using storytelling as a way to get lawmakers on their side, right? And really be willing to push for the Crown Act in various cities and states. And so there have been people, especially in particular Black people, sharing their first person narratives about race-based hair discrimination to lawmakers, to Congress people, to legislators, right? And I think that this is really important to think about because it's one thing to hear statistics, right? We have statistics that are sort of depersonalized. So for example, Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from work because of their hairstyle, right? Another statistic is 80% of Black women feel the need to change their hair to fit in the workplace, right? So these are statistics that maybe they're upsetting or a little bit surprising, right? Not good to hear, but I think that even hearing these statistics is still not the same as hearing a first person narrative of a Black woman sharing her story, right? Thank you for coming. Of course, of sharing her first person narrative of coming into work and being pulled aside by her boss and being told in front of everybody that her hairstyle that day is unprofessional, that it's unacceptable, and she can't finish the rest of her work day, right? I think that stories hold a lot of power. And so that's what I want to sort of end with, this idea again of storytelling and using our own voices. I think that oftentimes there's this dominant narrative that we have to avoid the first person. But I think that there's a lot of strength in the first person, and there's a lot of courage in sharing our first person narratives, right? And I think that this is what really taps into our shared humanity, right, as people. And so I want to encourage everybody to feel comfortable sharing their own stories, right, and creating spaces for ourselves and for others where our stories are valued, where they're listened to, where they're really being heard and appreciated, right? And working on this book showed me that we really can find that community anywhere, right? We just have to sort of be intentional about creating this community of storytelling, right? Because again, it's really powerful. And so sort of gonna end, when I showed my sister Chloe the final copy of this book, and we looked through all the stories and we looked through all the photos. First, she was really excited about all of these women talking to her and coming together to uplift her, to send her love. And so she felt automatically a lot better about her natural hair. And then she also, after going through a lot of the stories, she told me that she wanted to share her hair story about why she loves her natural hair now, because now she wants to help other little people, other little girls learn to love their natural hair as well. So I thought that was sort of a really beautiful full circle moment, right? And again, something that speaks to our shared humanity and our shared values. So thank you all so much for having me. Again, really honored to be here. Thank you, Gwen. So I would love, I'm not sure how much, let me see how much time we have left. But if there's space, anybody has. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right, so if like one or two people have comments, and I guess I'll also, should I be monitoring the Zoom?
I just have
Okay.
a question. Were you able to interview anybody in media on TV? Because I noticed a lot of women straighten their hair. Or they wear. Were you able to interview?
Yeah, I didn't interview, I didn't get to interview anybody who's on TV, but I did interview a couple of Black models. And so they shared experiences of, sometimes they'll go in for a photo shoot and the makeup artists and hairdressers won't know how to do makeup for, their skin, and they won't know how to do their hair texture, even though they're professional models, right? And that should be available to them. And recently I was speaking at another university, and one of the students shared that she has dreadlocks, and her dream is to be on TV as sort of I guess as a news anchor, right? She's a communications major, and she talked about feeling sort of, I guess, unsure about her dreadlocks and being able to go into the media world, because there was a time where this white man straight up told her that those locks aren't going to work for TV, right? So having to, I guess, again, to find that self-love in herself. It is. Anybody else? I guess we need one more person. If anybody wants to ask a question or just share. Yeah.
I just really like the brought up the fact about Texas Tiana and how she was brought throughout the entire movie, and like what it's like, even like cartoon characters look like for us in terms of like representation, and like your sister with her being born at the time, obviously like her characters right now that she's looking to are essentially characters, and she's not seeing herself in these animated films. And what that means to us growing up, and then now all these little girls that get have a baby for like mermaid and things like that, and what that means to us versus if we would have had those things growing up, maybe some of us would have been able to kind of like walk out into the hallways and things like that. So I just thought that was just really important, finding out how like animation has this huge effect on us as well.
Yeah, we should be doing that. And also, I think, media is important, and then also just being around people, being able to see people who have your hair texture and are embracing your natural hair, right? I think everybody who's being their most authentic self is inspiring other people to do the same, right? Whether it's in terms of hair or something else, because when you're your authentic self, you're giving others permission to be their authentic selves as well, right? So obviously it's great when it's mainstream media, they have more and more like, like Halle Bailey. I don't know, Emily Berry. I was like, yeah, but even just us as, I guess, sort of normal people, I think that.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you again.
So I want to thank you all for coming on behalf of Black Community Initiatives. Hopefully you have a great weekend for folks that celebrate the various holidays that are happening during this time. Hopefully you can celebrate them in a safe way, in a way that centers you and how you interact with your faith. And for the folks that are just going to be enjoying our hopefully 80-ish degree weather for the next few days, also enjoy that as well. I want to feature a couple more conversations for faculty and staff. We have our next Black community mixer on April 27th. It'll be over in the art gallery. I always forget the actual title, something around the young Black and young gifted and Black exhibit that's happening. So we will actually be having our mixer in the art gallery. So it's going to be amazing amongst the things. We have our Black Community Celebration that is open to everyone. So if folks attended the Black Community Gala last year, our gala has transformed into a community celebration and we're bringing it on campus. So that will be on June 2nd. Any more? Something on there. So yes, and we will, if you, for the folks that do not identify as Black, if you can sign up, if you can just put a check mark on the sign-in sheet, I will add you to our Black community newsletter list. So you can see when this podcast episode comes out, so you can see any other events that are happening that are surrounding, celebrating, cultivating spaces for Black folks on campus. Cool?
Cool.
For folks that know me, know that I love Proverbs, so I will leave you with 3 Proverbs. The first one, it is not taboo to go back and fetch that which you have forgotten. Sankofa. It is not taboo to go back and fetch that which you have forgotten. The second one is, I pointed to you the moon and the stars, and yet you only saw the tip of my finger. I pointed to you the moon and the stars, and yet you only saw the tip of my finger. And the last one is, until the lion has their own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Until the lion has their own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So I want to celebrate the historian that we have brought today to help us tell our stories. So let's do one more round of applause. And if nobody has said it today, I love you. Go in peace. Bye, y'all.
We love you.